Shields up, Ironbreakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video. Welcome back to Monster Hunter Rise, and today we're going to be taking a look at an IGN article by Ezra Crabe. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, I really don't mean to. The title of this article is How Monster Hunter Rise Appeals to Newcomers, More Action, Less Prep. Now, in a very similar fashion to what we saw with the Iceborne marketing campaign, it seems that the Monster Hunter team has selected like a specific outlet where they're going to be doing interviews and, providing them with exclusive gameplay and stuff like that. Now, for Iceborne, I remember that that outlet was Game Informer. This time around, it looks like it is going to be with IGN. Now, before we begin this particular video, I should mention that the point of this is not to, discuss this to the extremes of being like super negative about the game and being like, oh man, I'm so pissed off that this is happening. Like, there are things that were said in this particular article that I have certain feelings about, that I kind of like have opinions on, and I would like to talk about those opinions. That does not mean that, I'm less excited about the game. I'm just a little bit concerned about some of the things that are said. But ultimately, a lot of this is speculation by what is being said in the article, and it's just my opinion. And, I'll honestly want to get my hands on the actual game before I set in stone like, oh no, this is totally terrible. I don't like the changes that they've done here or the changes that they've done there. It's just, I like talking about these things, and I hope that you guys can, appreciate the discussion itself without just diving in and being like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. This is so bad. It's terrible. It's like, that's not really the point, because I know that there's going to be some things in here that are going to rub people the wrong way. And I just want to make sure that we all are on the same page of like, let's wait for the game to come out. Let's play the game, and then let's formulate our opinion. Okay? That's basically the point at where I'm at. So let's begin. I read through the whole article and I selected specific pieces that I'm going to be reading from the article, and then I will tell you my opinions on those pieces. So the very first one was the team originally planned areas separated by loading screens. And then Ichinose said, on the Nintendo Switch, we thought it would be difficult to preserve visual quality and detail in a sandbox environment. However, as development progressed, we started realizing that open environments had become more and more the norm for blockbuster titles, and the success of World inspired us to take the challenge. So this is a sentence that I thought was actually very interesting, to basically realize that the team was initially considering doing old school loading screens, which for those of you that started Monster Hunter with World, then you guys might not be aware of this, because, in World, you load into a map and then the whole map is available to you and you just hunt the monster throughout that map. You navigate the different zones of that map by, either taking your flying wyvern to a different camp, or you actually just run through the whole map and everything is just like very organic. Like, that was really cool in World, but in previous titles, the way that it worked is like each map would be constituted of several different zones, and each zone would then have like a loading screen whenever you wanted to change in between zones. Now, the reason that they did this for previous titles was because, they would be able to optimize the game based on the resources available to them on the different platforms, because you have to realize that back then the platform limitations in terms of hardware were a lot stricter than what we have right now. And also, a lot of Monster Hunter titles were essentially handheld. So this basically allowed them to not have to load assets that wouldn't really be relevant for your moment-to-moment gameplay, while keeping everything engaging in these areas that you had in the old maps. Now, I'm actually curious, like, how many of you guys are bothered by the loading screen stuff? Because I know that there are a lot of people that, like, you played Monster Hunter World and then you went back and you played GU. And I've heard a lot of people that actually preferred playing GU. And I'm actually curious, like, how do you guys feel in regards to having loading screens versus not having loading screens? Like, for some people, would that have been a deal breaker? Like, if Rise had featured the loading screens? I can tell you right now, for me, no, it wouldn't have been a deal breaker, not even remotely. But in terms of what I prefer, yeah, I prefer what they did, which is kind of like maybe smaller maps, even though in a way I kind of wish the maps were a little bit bigger, but I understand why they're not, because like if you look at the gameplay that we posted yesterday from IGN, where they kind of just like stuck a little bit more on the ground level of the Frost Islands map, you'll notice that that map is not particularly big. Now, there is a lot more verticality to it that we don't really get to see in that gameplay, because, you can go to the upper levels and whatnot, and there's like the chain thing that I assume you can kind of like walk through. And there's more to the map than what we see in that gameplay, but ultimately, in terms of just like sheer square footage, the map is not huge. And it's kind of the same thing for the Shrine Ruins. I didn't feel like that map was particularly big. So overall, the maps are a little bit smaller. At least it definitely feels like that to me, that they're a little bit smaller than the maps in World. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that's terrible. I would like to have them slightly bigger. In a way, it almost feels like if we did have the loading screens, then the maps could potentially feel bigger because you have more areas to them and whatnot. But, overall, I guess I'm just curious, like, is it a deal breaker for you if there were those loading screens? Maybe there's even some of you that would say, no, I would actually prefer the loading screens because they do give the illusion that the map is significantly bigger. Or do you prefer having it like what they did, which is a little bit smaller maps, a little bit more contained experiences, and just having like it being open world. Personally, I tend to veer more towards the open world, but I guess I'm not too bothered either way. So it's like if they had done loading screens, I'd be cool with that too, Now this next one is about quality of life changes. Open environments are not the only idea Rise borrows from World. With a more user-friendly design overall, World successfully introduced the series to a new audience. Quality of life improvements like wish lists that make it easy to keep track of the material necessary for weapon and armor upgrades, the ability to return to the camp from wherever you are on the map, allowing players to change equipment without having to go back to the hub, weapon trees that provide information you previously would have had to look up in walkthroughs. The list goes on. In this regard, there are certainly a lot of changes that we have adapted from World, says Ichinose. Now, in terms of the weapon trees, I think that is one of the really, really cool quality of life things that we got with Mods on a World because, before World, you would always have to look up the weapon trees in websites and stuff like that. So to me personally, that was a very welcome change. On the other hand, I do have to say, after having experienced the ability to return to camp from wherever you are on the map and just like restock stuff, that was actually one of the things that I personally didn't like that much. And I understand that this is a topic where the community is a little bit divided. If you guys want to discuss this in the comment section, I would just ask you to at least keep it civil because I've seen like a lot of people get really nasty when it comes to this particular argument. Now, the reason I personally preferred it the old way is because it implicated that you needed to do more preparation before the hunt. Because one of the things that I really like about Monster Hunter is that it's not just a game where you jump in and your whole thing is the action of just the boss fight, right? There is the aspect of the boss fight, but there's also the aspect of it actually being a hunt where you have to prepare yourself. You have to, bring stuff that you might need. Like you might maybe want to bring a trap because this particular monster moves too much. You might want to bring, Mega Dash juice in the older games because you know that you might have to block a lot if you have a shield, or maybe you're playing dual blade, so you need to manage your stamina a little bit better, and the dash juice stuff helps. You have to bring in meat so that you can recover your stamina while you're out hunting. You have to bring whetstones, which even in World, whetstones were made kind of like less meaningful because they're infinite. But, the fact that they're infinite is not really a problem so long as you still need to do the sharpening action. So, I just liked that experience of you having to prepare before a hunt because it makes it feel more like a hunt and less like just a boss fight. That's one of the reasons why I personally prefer it. If you like, I think you should be able to restock some things like you've had in the old games where like after a while in a high rank hunt or in a G rank hunt, you would receive like additional supplies so that if your fight is dragging on too long, you're like, okay, I'm running out of healing potions, but they delivered a couple of more to the camp so I can go get those. But having access to the entirety of your inventory every step of the way is something that I'm not actually a big fan of in World. And I understand the argument of like, oh, you don't have to use it. You can just, bring the stuff that you want and do the hunt that way. Yeah, that's the same argument that you can say, well, you don't have to upgrade your weapons. You can keep playing with the default weapons. It's like, if there's something in game that gives you an advantage, I mean, most people are going to use it. I just prefer the way that it was in the old game and having the monsters balanced around you bringing in a specific loadout to deal with that monster rather than like, oh, this thing isn't working. I guess I'm going to go over there and swap. Like, for instance, you bring dual blades to fight a Diablos or something. And for some reason you're struggling, right? And you're like, well, this isn't really working. I'm just going to go to camp, swap back into my lance, and boom, here we go, right? I'm not a huge fan of that. I prefer, you go in with a gear set, you do your prep work, and then you go into the hunt. And that, to me, felt more organic, which this kind of goes hand in hand with the next thing that I want to bring up, which is, while in previous entries you would be in trouble if you forgot to prepare a hot drink when heading into a cold area like Frost Islands, Ichinose has announced that this item won't be making a comeback. For players that enjoyed Monster Hunter's action but were overwhelmed by its layers of preparation, Rise seems to be a much more forgiving experience. Now, this isn't exactly news because this has been announced like 2 weeks ago or something like that, and I didn't really talk about it then because I didn't feel like making a video just saying, hey guys, hot drinks aren't in, here's how I feel about it, right? I wanted to have like more subjects to discuss, which is why this particular video makes it perfect for me to talk about this. And I know that a lot of people don't care that much about hot drinks, but I actually do. I preferred it the way that it was when you actually had to drink hot drinks. I'm assuming that you won't have to drink cold drinks either, because that would make sense. Like, oh yeah, we're removing the hot drink, but you still have to use the cold drink, so probably no hot drink, most likely no cold drink either. And I know that a lot of players will argue for the fact that, well, it's just a maintenance thing, right? Every 10 minutes, you pop your drink, boom, done. And it's like, yes, you are correct. It is just a maintenance thing. But I mean, if you start thinking about it like that, it's like, well, eating to maintain your stamina is just a maintenance thing. Sharpening your weapon is just a maintenance thing. Like if we start going down this list of things that could be considered maintenance in Monster Hunter, I think you can get to a point where it's like, well, now you don't have to sharpen anymore. Now you don't have to, eat food anymore. Now you don't have to, do a bunch of other things anymore. And it's like, I want to make sure that people understand, like, this doesn't bother me, okay? This is not something that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they've done this. This is just something that contributed a lot to my immersion. Like I said, even in the previous topic, I find that the preparation aspect of Monster Hunter, like actually managing your, I'm gonna say your farm, but in World it was your botanical center or whatever, when you are planting stuff and you're preparing, like the whole preparation aspect of it is a big thing that separates Monster Hunter from other similar experiences, right? Where, you really do have to prepare, you have to figure out, you have to know what the monster is going to throw at you, and you have to bring adequate, I mean, you don't have to, but you can bring adequate items that will give you an edge on different fights. And I always found that to be very satisfying. And hot drinks and cold drinks is just something that contributes a lot to immersion. And immersion is a big aspect of it for me because, like, yeah, my hunter is in this cold environment and I have to use these potions to make sure that, my hunter is not going to get too cold. Or, in other situations, like my hunter is in this really hot environment, so I have to bring these cold potions. Like, I find that stuff personally engrossing. Like, I find that stuff immersing. But again, this is one of those things that I want to hear from you guys in the comment sections. But again, I would like to request, please remain civil. Please do not just be like, because I've seen a lot of comments get thrown around, stuff like people calling out, oh, world babies, they're doing this for world babies. And it's like, I don't think that's the right attitude to have, because I want us to be as welcoming to newcomers in this franchise as possible. Because ultimately, remember, the more successful the franchise is, the more budget they're going to get for future titles. So keep that in mind and just try to keep it civil. So this next one is about endemic life and difficulty. Here's what they say in the article. By eating meals before heading into the quest and catching as many endemic life creatures as possible to max out their stats before heading into battle, players can take on the challenge with more advantages than ever before. The beauty lies that while Capcom chooses not to implement difficulty settings, you can balance the difficulty for each individual quest yourself by choosing how many stat boosts you pick up along the way. If you want the hardcore experience, ignore both meals and endemic life entirely. And then Ichinose said, I think that the more experienced hunter doesn't need to make detours before heading into a fight. But if you want a well-balanced challenge, you probably want to at least pick up the endemic life you come across while going after your target. And the first thing I want to tackle is the difficulty settings. I'm not a huge fan of games implementing a bunch of different difficulty settings because usually what ends up happening is they end up not having the resources to properly balance each difficulty setting. So you end up with a hard that is too hard, a normal that is too easy, and an easy that is just a complete cakewalk. That has been my experience throughout a lot of video games over the years, is that The more you try balancing things around multiple difficulty levels, the more the experience gets diluted down to a point where it makes it harder for each individual to have fun, which is why I prefer it if they don't like none of this. You want the hard mode, you want the easy mode. Like I personally prefer not to have that, so I'm happy that there's still not going to be any difficulty selections or anything like that, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense in a Monster Hunter game to begin with. But this notion that if you want the hardcore experience, you should ignore both meals and endemic life entirely doesn't really add up to me, because basically the whole thing about you eating a meal before you go out into a hunt is just such a crucial part of the experience in Monster Hunter at this point that I don't really see myself ever ignoring meals. In terms of endemic life, the way that I think I'm going to be playing is I'm just going to be picking stuff up along the way, like Ichinose says. I don't think I really want to go too much out of my way unless I'm struggling too much with a specific encounter. Then sure, maybe I'll go out of my way to pick up specific endemic life. There are things, though, that I see myself going out of my way to pick up. Like, for instance, if I find a good spot with a blast toad, then yeah, I want to go pick that up. If I find a spot with that spider thing that lets you mount instantly, that's also a very good thing to have. And there are other ones like the stink mink to bring monsters close to each other in case you're trying to provoke a fight. Or there's the quail that works almost like a portable Kurupeku that you can just set down and it calls monsters to your location. There's a lot of interesting endemic life things that I can see myself eventually going out of the way to pick up. But I think on a majority of hunts, it's just going to be like, oh, whatever's on the way, I'll pick it up and go straight to the monster and beat the crap out of it. So, yeah. Continuing with the theme of difficulty, in this next section they say, to make the learning curve a bit more approachable, Ichinose advises beginning players to start with the village quests. In previous Monster Hunter games, village quests are the single-player only story quests. And then they have an Ichinose quote where he says, "We have scaled down the difficulty for village quests, so they should function as a good entry point for new players." Now, this one right here has me a little bit concerned, although, once again, I know that a lot of people are going to grab that sentence and probably run with it. I would advise caution because ultimately, as we all know, the real endgame of Monster Hunter is going to be in the Gathering Hub. So whether or not the village quests are going to be super easy is really only going to affect the beginning of the game for us, which for some of the newer players, it could actually be the breaking point for them, like if they start and they get frustrated early on. And, you know, it does make it easier for those players to just progress and at least get a good feel for the game. But as someone who has played both the older games and the newer games, even if on the older games I didn't go like into the very end game, right? Although on GU I did do everything on GU, I did get to like G rank on 4U as well. And I think I was coming close to that on 3U. And in World, obviously, I just like went all the way with everything. But it's like, for the purpose of this particular discussion, like I did all of the village quests in those games, right? So I know what that is like. And in my opinion, I didn't think that the village quests were that hard to begin with. I thought that they were particularly easy in 4 Ultimate, and they were maybe a little bit more challenging in Generations. But even still, when I say a little bit more challenging, it's just in comparison with how easy they were in 4 Ultimate, which definitely felt easier than like 3 Ultimate and Freedom Unite and stuff like that. So my feeling on this is like, I'm not a huge fan of them lowering the difficulty of it. I mean, that's just the way that I look at it. Even in World, I didn't think that village quests, I mean, then again, it's not like there were really village quests in World, because every quest was, technically speaking, a potential multiplayer quest. But it's just like, I didn't think that they were that hard if you were soloing them in World, or in Generations, or in 4U, or in 3U. I thought that they were pretty accessible. You know, the hub quests are harder if you're doing them solo, or even in some cases with just 2 players, they do feel a little bit harder. But it's just like, the village has never really been something that I look at and I'm like, man, that was hard. Like, if anything, in the case of Generations, I thought that it was boring because there were just too many gathering quests in Generations, like way too many. Like your first 5 hours, if you're a completionist, if you want, and you want to like actually complete all of the low rank quests, it was just boring. Because you had to do so many slaying quests where you have to kill like the smaller monsters. You had to do so many gathering quests, so many egg quests, so many point gathering quests. So that was my complaint, not how hard they were. That's what turned me off. I think that is potentially what would turn off newer players to the series, more so than how hard those quests could actually be, is how many of those quests are going to actually be, okay, here's some gathering stuff. I'm not saying there shouldn't be gathering quests or egg quests. I think those are definitely there and they serve a purpose and they're somewhat fun to introduce players to the concepts of gathering and why you need to gather to make, to be able to supply yourself with potions and buffs and stuff like that. I think that is important. It's just the amount of quests and particularly the amount of slaying quests as well. I feel like World struck a bit of a better balance with that kind of stuff, but let me know what you guys think about that. But ultimately, I'm not a big fan of them making it easier, but when it gets right down to the end game of it, it's not really going to affect us because they're only talking about village quests. And end game is going to be in the hub. It's just I would still like to be challenged while I'm playing the village portion of the game, and I don't want my challenge to be around, well, I guess I'm just gonna not eat food and not pick up endemic life. That's definitely not what I'm gonna do. I mean, I'm not gonna artificially increase the difficulty of the quests by actively avoiding to take advantage of systems that they provide for me in the game. But yeah, this was one of the things that I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. There's one more point where I'm also very conflicted about this particular article. We'll talk about that one a little bit further ahead. But once again, I want to make sure that I hammer down the point. Do not just fly off the handle from what they're saying here, because for all we know, this is still stuff that they could change further down the line if they see that the feedback is not particularly happy about it. But I don't think there's any reason for us to just like go on a friggin' tirade and just start criticizing everything. So, that's just the way that I look at it. Now, continuing onwards, in this next section, they're talking about the training area. Here's what they have to say. The training area has evolved as well, as players can adjust the attack patterns and position of the head of the giant mechanized Tetranodon in the center of the arena. This allows players to practice for different situations with their weapon of choice. You can even head up to the training area together to test your teamwork with any threat before heading into actual quests. Without any threat before heading into actual quests. And this is actually something that I like a lot. Like, we kind of already knew this, but it's nice to see it in writing on an actual article, because we had seen in the trailers multiple players in the training area at the same time. But, this just confirms you're going to be able to adjust, and I think this might have been confirmed on Twitter already, but you're going to be able to adjust, like, what the Tetranodon is doing. I think you can even adjust it to attack you so that you can practice stuff like Foresight Slash with Longsword, guard points with Charge Blade, which is an incredibly welcome addition, because this is going to be the best place for people to train stuff like their counters. Like, for instance, if I want to train the Sword and Shield counter, which it does have the counter, the right trigger plus a counter that it has, I can just, equip some block maybe to see how potent of an attack am I able to block, test that stuff out, and then actually figure out the proper window to do that and to go into perfect rush from that counter. Like, that is going to be a very, very welcome addition to the game. There's also like targets in the background where you can like shoot stuff with your guns and your bows and the friggin' insect glaive to shoot the pheromone. So it's cool to be able to play around with all this stuff and be actually able to bring your friends into the area so that you can, come up with different strategies. I think this is something that we'll actually see teams like Team Darkside actually going in there and practicing stuff so that they can do stuff even more in sync on a hunt, which is going to provide us with some very entertaining videos. I can't wait to see what they do with this stuff. Continuing with the theme of difficulty, this next section says the following. Ichinose hopes that players will switch weapons more frequently than before. While he understands the fun of becoming an expert in one specific weapon, with 14 vastly different weapons available, such players will only experience one fraction of Monster Hunter's diversity. And then Ichinose says, one reason for players to stick with the same weapon was always the fact that it takes so much time to upgrade weapons, which is why we decided to significantly reduce the amount of materials necessary to upgrade weapons for Rise. And then they say, considering that grinding for materials in previous titles could easily take hours, this tweak sounds like another huge step forward in welcoming more casual players. And this is another one of those statements that does concern me a little bit. While I think it's great to be more inviting of new players, like I always say, we should bring as many people as possible that want to enjoy this great game into the fold, I already think that the current grind levels in Monster Hunter World and even GU, well, GU is a little bit exaggerated because of the way that deviants work, but if you take away the deviant system and you would make that particular system a little bit more friendly in terms of the tickets that you can get, because that one is a little bit crazy. But like, if you take that away and you just have the regular crafting, I didn't think that GU was particularly hard to craft your weapons in terms of how much time you would have to put into crafting a specific weapon. Same thing with World. Like, sure, there's the occasional time where it's like, oh man, I really need like a Rathalos Ruby or something. And that can be a little bit challenging to get, which is actually something that would be cool if they did like a system that I would be able to, me and Gaijin talked about this, like a system that I would be able to grab lower rank materials from a monster. And I don't mean like low rank, high rank. I mean like, for instance, the high rank wings of a Rathalos or something like that. And you take like, you assign a point value system to them, like kind of like what we had in GU actually. And you assign like a point system to them, and I would just be able to trade in, say, 10 wings or something like that for a ruby. You know, like a system like that would be cool, but just like, if you just reduce the amount of materials, which is what they say they do here, just reduce the amount of materials that you need in order to upgrade a weapon. I don't know how I feel about that, because it's like, to me, the thing that keeps me from playing other weapons is never really the amount of materials that it takes to craft a weapon. It's never really the effort that I have to put in to craft a different weapon. It is more so the effort that you have to put into actually mastering that weapon and becoming good at playing that weapon than necessarily, oh, I can't believe I'm going to have to grind, you know, the Monster X to get the weapon that I want. It's like, if I'm really interested in one, like if I'm really interested in Sword and Shield, dude, I'll fight every single monster I have to craft the sword and shields that I want to craft. Same thing for the gun lance, same thing for the lance. Like, if I'm interested in a specific weapon, it doesn't really matter to me how many monsters I have to grind. Now, what matters is how is my mastery of that weapon. So I don't know, like reducing the amount of materials, it just seems like you're not going to have to kill monsters as much, which is actually a complaint that I know Gaijin had in regards to, for instance, investigations. Like we discussed in the Third Fleet podcast, how one of the reasons why Gaijin didn't like investigations is because it made it too easy to get materials from monsters. So this is going to be very interesting for next week's Third Fleet podcast. So you make sure that you don't miss out on that one, because me and Gaijin are going to go over this interview most likely and talking about the different points in the interview, and I think it's going to be very interesting. But yes, this is another one of those points that I don't necessarily agree with, but again, I'm willing to wait for the final product, see how it all pans out. But basically the point is, if it's just going to be me like, oh, I'll hunt 2 Rathaloses and I can make like a full set of armor, max level weapon, is like, I don't think that's going to be that fun, right? But again, we'll have to see how much the reduction is. This is still very much very much preliminary speculation. We don't really know what it's going to be like. We just know that it is going to be easier. And at the same time, maybe we will get more weapons, although that will require more work from the art team. So I don't know. Because like, if you're going to make it easier, in terms of more weapons, I mean just like more weapons per tree. But I don't know, dude, it'd be hard to get more weapons than we had in GU. Like the trees in GU were freaking massive. So yeah, I'm super curious to see how this pans out in the final game, but this, as well as the easier village quests, is something that has me concerned, and I don't necessarily agree on what is being reported here, you know, on the direction that they're taking, but I'm willing to see what it all boils down in a final product, because ultimately I'm going to play this game no matter what. I mean, you guys know it. It is what it is. And then finally, the one last note that I took in regards to the interview, which is this is a bit of vindication for me. And here's what they said. When asked about the best weapon to start with, Ichinose says that the sword and shield used to be a standard answer, but the weapon has evolved so much that it has become difficult to recommend as a starter option. And then the direct quote is, I think that the longsword may have become the best weapon for beginners, as you can easily deliver a good flow of attacks by simply pressing the buttons while not having to master how to block. So this is a very interesting thing, because I remember that back in Iceborne, I told people I consider the sword and shield to be one of the most complex weapons in the game, period. Even more complex than Charge Blade. Now, My opinion hasn't really changed in regards to that, but you know, after digging even deeper into Charge Blade, I have, let's just say I have a more nuanced take on it. I still think that the Sword and Shield definitely has a lot more complexity to it, but that's not to say that it's not as big of a gap as I would have thought. Let's put it like that. And I know that a lot of people disagree with me on this, but it's definitely interesting to see Ichinose said, dude, this weapon has evolved a lot. Like this is no longer the beginner-friendly weapon that everybody likes to say. Oh, Sword and Shield, beginner-friendly weapon. No, pretty much since the Iceborne evolution, I would say Sword and Shield has come a long way. Particularly if you want to be really good with Sword and Shield, like the weapon is a lot more complex than a lot of people give it credit to. And it's nice to see Ichinose recognizing that. But anyway, overall, this was a lot of interesting information that we got in this particular interview. And the thing to me, the big takeaway, if I want to just like sum up my opinions in a very quick conclusion for this video, it is I like quality of life. I think it's great, but I'm not a huge fan of the you know, restocking back at camp during a hunt, because I like the preparation aspect and it contributes a lot to my immersion into this being a hunt instead of just a simple boss fight. And I think that there is such a thing as dialing things a little bit too far back, where it breaks that immersion a little bit and it takes too much of the preparation aspect of the hunt. I mean, the article itself says more action, less prep, and I'm not necessarily a fan of it. Like, I'll always take more action, but I don't necessarily like the less prep part of it, because it's a big reason as to why I personally enjoy Monster Hunter. Again, it's not something that's gonna break, it's not a deal breaker for me, but it is something that does make me take a little bit of a step back. Then there's the difficulty thing in the village quests, which I didn't really think that they were that difficult to begin with, but fine, I'm able to accept that because ultimately the end game is going to be in the hub, and they didn't say anything about lowering the difficulty in the hub, so that's what really matters for me. And then finally, we have the thing about the less materials required, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, which is like, yeah, sure, it will allow me to upgrade my weapons faster, I'll get to the end of the tree faster. And in a way, it will allow me to experiment more with different weapons in the same tree. Not necessarily different weapon types, but just different weapons in the same tree, whereas maybe I'll look at a weapon at the end of the tree and I'll be like, wow, this weapon's useless. This time around, maybe I'll be like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. It's not like it's gonna cost me too many materials. So that part of it is positive. The other part of it is, am I going to feel accomplished when I get to the end of the tree though? That's a big deal for me, because like, some people are going to be like, well, I don't like the grind. I like things being easier to craft. But to me, it's like you being able to craft a certain weapon, like there is a sense of achievement to be had there. Like after you've done your struggle, like for instance, after you finish the Fatalis set, even though it is pretty much a broken set, like there is definitely a sense there where you're just like, man, I crafted the Fatalis set. I crafted the Fatalis weapon. I fought Fatalis enough times to get all of these materials. And if it's like, if you're able to do that within like 3 kills, like get the entirety of the set and like 2 or 3 weapons out of it, like that would greatly diminish the sense of achievement that you get from that. This is my opinion, but I'll be curious to hear from you guys about all of these topics in the comment section down below. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button because it helps more than you can possibly imagine. If you did not enjoy it, then hit the dislike button because feedback is important. Make sure to leave me all of your feedback in the comment section. If you usually enjoy my content, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so that you get all of the videos in your feed. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.